All right, so now we're rushing to the end of When the Night Comes Falling by Howard Blum. We're on part 5 of the book, which is the last major part. Actually, I think there's one chapter beyond that. I'm trying to pull it up on the screen now again. I had it up there. So this is part 5, the defense's story. After that is part 6, Steve's story, which is only one chapter, and then an epilogue. So we're really rushing to the end of this now. Chapter 5. Part 5 is only 4 chapters long, and we're going to do 29 and 30 right now. We could have probably easily done all of them, but I want to kind of break it up just a little bit. So we're going to do 29 and 30, then we're going to get into 31 and 32 together as a separate video. Then we'll do Steve's story and probably the epilogue together. So there'll be 3 more videos. This one actually and 2 more videos, and then we'll be done with this book in time for James Patterson's hit piece to come out. And so I want to just clarify right now that you would think that in a book where there's actually a section for the defense's story, that now we're going to hear what the defense's argument's going to be, right? So we've heard 3/4 of this book, or 4/5 of the book, four parts, and now we're on part 5. 4 parts of this book have been purely about how Kohberger's guilty. Now we get to hear the defense's side, right? Not really. You get to hear Howard Blum tell you that the defense has a Hail Mary and all these pipe dreams, and none of it really is going to stick. So even when he tells you their side of the story, it's going to come with all this biting sarcasm and Hail Mary attitude, and it really is pipe dreams. It's not going to happen. So he can't even give the defense much credence. He gives it a little, and there's some points in here I think that are interesting. Some new details, perhaps, that I certainly didn't know. Maybe you already knew, but there's some new details that I think. And so I'm going to read this almost verbatim. These 2 chapters are very quick, very short, and I'm almost going to read every single word. In fact, I might almost read every word, but I'm going to comment in between. So let's go ahead and just get started. So this first italicized part that's highlighted, this is stuff that he starts a lot of chapters with, an italicized part, which is just kind of like random thoughts. It's not attributed to anybody. It's like somebody's thoughts. So he says, stepping into the courtroom, you know the score. Only one thing matters, getting your client off the hook. So according to Howard Blum, a defense attorney's job is to take a guilty person and try to get them to walk on something that they did. That's not what a defense attorney is supposed to do, is try to take a guilty person and get them to walk. What a defense attorney is doing is defending people's civil liberties and making sure that when you convict somebody, you do it properly and that you don't violate their civil liberties in order to do so. Because if you violate somebody's civil liberties, you can violate everyone's civil liberties. So in Blum's sarcastic attitude, his opinion is that a defense attorney's job is to try to find ways to get guilty people to walk free. That's horseshit. So we'll just put that aside. If the facts are on your side, you pound them. If not, pound the table. So just make a lot of noise. That's what he's basically claiming the defense is going to do. Howard Blum to the rescue. If you don't have facts, just beat your chest and make a bunch of noise. And here's the thing. Now here's where he gives a little credence to the defense, as he says what they're thinking is, it didn't go down the way the prosecution's claiming. There are too many gaps, too many things that don't add up. I agree. I've said this from the beginning. The prosecution's case doesn't make sense, in my opinion. And what he's stating, Howard Blum, is that the defense says the same thing. The prosecution's story doesn't make sense. It didn't, even if Kohberger was involved, it did not happen the way that they said it did. That's the thing at the end of the story. That's what I've been saying since the beginning, is even if Brian Kohberger was involved, even if he was an accomplice in this, it did not happen the way the prosecution is telling you it did. So at the end of the day, what does that mean for a jury? What does it mean for a jury if they're wrong about how it happened? Did they just have to get close and convince the jury that it's close enough? Because they're certainly not going to get it right, in my opinion. It's not how it happened. So the question is, how much will the jury want to convict somebody on close enough? But anyways, we'll get into that. And now the facts are on your side, and you're ready to pound the table to smithereens. And you're staring, eyes as big as saucers, at a premise that once seemed impossible. He didn't do it. So he admits that the defense, as they started to poke holes in the prosecution's theories, they began to realize, what if Kohberger's not guilty? As if that was the first time they considered that. Like as they're realizing, hey, wow, the prosecution's case kind of sucks. Maybe this guy didn't do it. Maybe we're figuring out for the first time our guy didn't do it. Fear commands Brian Kohberger's defense team, a relentless fear. And at first I'm thinking that's horseshit, but what he's trying to say is all labor, everybody on Ann Taylor's team labors with the knowledge that their client's life is on the line. So that's causing some fear in his mind that the stakes are high. They can't get any higher. Your client's life is literally on the line. In a filing to the court on June 2023, the prosecution had charged that the killings were especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and that the suspect had, quote, exhibited utter disregard for human life. Therefore, the filing went on with the sober resolve, considering all the evidence currently known, the state felt compelled to seek the death penalty. That's one of the things that's required for the death penalty. It has to be particularly heinous, atrocious, or cruel. So the defense said, or the prosecution said, this absolutely meets that standard, because there was no need for it. That was a butcher slaughterhouse. Everything is heinous, cruel, unnecessary, totally qualifies for the death penalty. Then the stakes were cranked up higher. Weeks later, a state law went into effect ensuring that in the aftermath of the seemingly inevitable guilty verdict in the case, so again, Howard Blum's letting us know it is inevitable, it is a seemingly inevitable, Brian Kohberger will be convicted. And so the state has ratcheted up the things. They know that Brian Kohberger is going to be executed. They've had problems in the past, I believe, Idaho, in trying to execute somebody by lethal injection. It has failed before. And so they want to make sure that when Brian Kohberger, when Brian Kohberger is sentenced and executed, that they don't screw it up. So they authorized at the last minute the firing squad, because they've screwed up before with a lethal injection. And they're going to make sure they're going to kill Brian Kohberger. Like, we're damn near not going to get this wrong. So if the lethal injection isn't going to work, we're going to shoot him. One way or another, this guy's going down. So if the requisite cocktail of chemicals for a lethal intravenous drip is unavailable, this recently approved, and that's possible too. It could be that the concoction needed to kill you with the lethal injection isn't available, and they'll have to delay his death. Oh my God, that'd be horrible. So in comes the state to quickly approve the firing squad so they can kill him immediately. So they don't have to wait for any F up in the chemical mixture or some drug being not available. We need to have multiple ways to kill this guy so we can kill him quickly. And yes, I'm hitting that a little hard, but that's even what Blum is trying to say, is the state is rushing to make sure that they can kill Kohberger as quickly as possible, and that nothing's going to stop that. Nothing's going to stop them from doing so, because they've decided that that's what it has. That's inevitably where it's going to end. With the specter haunting Brian Kohberger's world, his lawyers have been diligent. They have pounded the courthouse table with motions, a rat-a-tat of demands for discovery, objections to protective orders, even a curious request for the personnel files of 3 of the cops who played a key role in helping clamp the cuffs on Kohberger. Now, that's something a little new to me. I didn't realize, I guess, that they had actually requested 3 police officers' personnel files. I know they were looking into potential Brady violations against an officer, or at least that was the rumor early on. Now it's saying that there were 3 police officers that they looked into. Now inquiring minds want to know, what did the defense? Now again, Howard Blum's going to say the defense is Hail Marying. The defense is just going to request every cop's personnel file to try to see if they can find something dirty on some cop. Or did the defense have a tip or a lead on something and looked at very specific officers and asked for the personnel files of very specific officers? Inquiring minds want to know. You know when we're going to find out? At the trial. You know where I'm going to be? At the trial. So we're going to move on. It was a seemingly desperate strategy, and the authorities paid it little mind. In the second floor directive shack of Moscow Police Department building, the mood for a telling example remained confident. Saudi, the cops taunted derisively. Some other dude did it. That's Saudi for them. Some other dude did it. Sure. How many times have we heard that? And how many times does that case work out? We got our man, they insisted, and there's no way he's going to wiggle out of this. So yes, cops in their sarcastic attitude, of course, believe that every person claims that they're innocent, and they just mock and scoff. Of course, everyone says they're innocent, but we've got you. We're going to get you. You're going to go down, because that's the cops' attitude. It isn't. They always believe that who they got is guilty, and they always believe that an innocent person trying to defend their innocence is just another asshole saying somebody else did it. Oh yeah, somebody else did it. That's the way it always goes. It's just this attitude. Cops don't get it wrong. If they've arrested you, you're guilty, and I don't want to hear your whining little ass saying you're innocent, because you wouldn't be arrested if you're innocent. For starters, and maybe for finishers too, there was the 51 terabytes of ostensibly confirming data that the prosecution had handed over to the defense. So they're trying to state how screwed the police believe the defense is. They've turned over 51 terabytes of information. And then they add, he adds, you might as well be counting the grains of sand on a beach. The sly bottom line was that it would keep an already inundated defense busy for a while and then some. Now that's assholery to its extreme, if Howard Blum is correct. He's basically suggesting that the cops, the prosecution, are slyly inundating an already overwhelmed defense by dumping shitloads of data discovery on them, 51 terabytes, and basically kind of laughing about good luck sorting through that. You're already going to be overwhelmed, but here you go. Here's 51 terabytes of information to sort through as well. It's a sly bottom line to keep them busy. That sounds like they're trying to manipulate the defense into a loss. That's what it sounds like. But if that was not sufficient to convince the Idaho prison warden to hurry up and get his order in for the chemicals that give the execution hemlock its lethal bite, the local authorities reminded them that it had some more aces up their sleeve. Now listen to that fucking shit. Listen to that. So Howard Blum is basically saying the state is trying to quickly get the prison system to order that goddamn chemical concoction so we can kill Brian Kohberger immediately. Get it ordered. It's a foregone conclusion. This guy's toast. Get the freaking chemicals ordered. And if not, hurry up and make that freaking firing squad thing available. We got to kill this guy quickly. Quickly. They don't want any appeals process. They want to kill this guy as quickly as possible. They're rushing to make sure that they get the chemicals ordered right now because it's a foregone conclusion he's guilty. And they want to make sure that if the chemicals don't come in time, they can shoot him in the head. For one persuasive item, there was, and then they're continuing about more, that they have more aces up their sleeve. For one persuasive item, there was the DNA on the button knife sheath found partially under Maddie Mogan. It was a perfect match with the genetic swab of Kohberger's cheek taken shortly after his arrest. For another, there was a video of the white Hyundai Elantra, similar to the suspects, tearing away from the King Road murder scene in a gray pre-dawn November morning within minutes of the murders. And for still another, there was the cell phone tower tracking data. Just before 3 a.m., as Kohberger left his apartment on the night of the murders, he apparently powered down. And then nearly at 5 a.m., about an hour after the killings, his phone sprang back to life just south of Moscow. In a cop's distrustful world where there are no accidents, this timeline was damn incriminating. So again, we're still arguing about whether the phone powered down or lost cell service because he went out of cell phone range. But they're painting the narrative. He powered his phone down, turned it off after allowing himself to be tracked leaving his apartment, then decided to power it down, and then power it back up before returning to his apartment. None of that makes sense to me, but for law officers, it's clear signs of guilt. The prosecution had even put together a semblance of a motive. So this is the prosecution putting out a semblance of a motive. It was a neat two-step argument. First, there was Kohberger's nature, his equilibrium. As revealed by his teenage internet posts, he had always been a balancing act and a problematic one to boot. Quote from Kohberger, allegedly when he was younger, "I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. I am starting to view everyone as this," unquote, which sounds kind of creepy. So they're using it to say, see, he already feels like he's different than everybody else. He's an organic sack of meat. Everyone's an organic sack of meat. He had, for example, written, "Now I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, tired, useless, stupid man in the mirror. He's a complete disgrace. He doesn't deserve to live." So he's feeling suicidal, it sounds like, right? But they're going to use that as that's why he decided to kill people. It's, as they said, it's a semblance of a motive. Next, there were the series of shocks that rained down on his fragile stability, the incriminating timeline of his escalating confrontations with his supervising professors in the criminal justice department at WSU. On November 2nd, 11 days before the King Road murders, he had been hauled before the department bigwigs and informed that he had better shape up or else, and it was pretty formidable or else. If Kohberger couldn't get his act together, behave more professionally in and out of classroom, then he'd lose his teaching assistant's fellowship, which would also, more consequentially, signal the end of everything to which he had aspired. It would send him sliding back down the ladder he'd been so determined climbing since he lost 100 pounds, kicked heroin, and made up his mind to get a doctorate. He'd be ruined. And if you have nothing, you have nothing to lose. It was the sort of existential jolt that could set demons loose. So in other words, because he was getting kicked out of school, and it was virtually assured he was getting kicked out of school, he's going to lose his teacher assistantship, and therefore lose his money, and therefore couldn't afford to go to school, and therefore everything. He had nothing left to lose. Killing somebody is the only option at this point. It's the only option. You got to kill somebody because there's no other options left. If you've lost your funding, the only logical solution is to go murder 4 people. Because it's the only option left. Or at least that was the narrative that the prosecutors believed that they could convincingly spin. Good. Okay, good. I don't know that a jury will buy it, but yes. But to be fair, a lot of people in America have already believed that Kohberger is guilty before he steps into the courtroom, but we'll see. And then there was the clincher. Cop after cop promised that it would be the single unshakable reason that Kohberger would be sent by the state to his richly deserved death is Bill Thompson, the county prosecutor. With his long white biblical beard and down-home uniform of jeans and fleece vest, Thompson was a local legend. He had been in office for over 30 years and had famously done the impossible in the closely followed Rachel Anderson murder case, where he won a conviction without the body even being found, an improbable victory that sent no less a culprit than a blood relative of Al Capone to jail for life. So they're like, this guy's a fucking hero. He can convict somebody of murder even if there's no body found. So we got this case. This guy's a rock star. Rumor has it, however, by the way, that this will be Thompson's last hurrah. There was no way the cops believed that he'd retire to idle away his days strumming guitar with his band Gefilte Trout and casting his fishing rod without having secured his already impressive reputation with a final victory in a big trial. And trials don't come any bigger than this in Latah County. So people in Moscow will tell you, let the defense file all the Hail Mary motions they want. They're clutching at straws. Case closed. The facts will prevail. And that's how a lot of people comment on my thread. The case is over, sir. I don't know what you're holding on to, but this case is over. Brian Kohberger is convicted before he steps in the courtroom. We're going to kill that motherfucker because he's guilty. And I'm angry only because, again, at the end of the day, if Brian Kohberger did it, he should get whatever sentence is on the table. And if that's death, that's death. I'm okay with that. Somebody just recently said to me, as I side tangent before this last chapter we're going to wrap up, somebody said, boy, you're going to feel awfully embarrassed when Brian Kohberger is convicted and he's found guilty. I'm not going to be embarrassed to shit. I'm believing in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. I'm not ashamed of presuming somebody's innocent until proven guilty. And if he's found guilty, so be it. What I'm ashamed of is that there are Americans out there who don't believe in the presumption of innocence and are already saying that the guy's guilty before he's even had his day in trial. That makes me ashamed. That as an American, you don't believe in the American judicial system, which is presumption of innocence until proven guilty. So no part of me is going to feel ashamed if Brian Kohberger is found guilty, because that's what you're supposed to do. Is you're supposed to presume he's innocent until proven guilty. And if he's proven guilty, I'm okay with that. Let's just be the truth. That's all. Last chapter. Bad facts is a phrase defense lawyers like to bandy about. In Moscow, a supposedly open and shut case was starting to loom as a lot more open than shut. So now they're talking about how the defense is realizing that the prosecution's case has a lot more holes than they thought. At least that's what the defense team had been excitedly whispering to one another, according to several people privy to their deliberations. So again, now Blum's saying, well, the defense thinks there's got a lot of holes. That's what they're whispering about. But nope, it doesn't. Wait till it's like, he can't even give the defense any bit of credence. Everything about them is they're wrong. They think that they've got a case. They don't. They think that they're going to win. They're not. And all these things. So given the state's much vaunted evidence of a couple of good swift kicks and it would break apart, that's the defense, thinking that they can just break this case apart by a couple of kicks on some sketchy DNA or sketchy evidence. So let's talk about the DNA. The DNA in the knife sheath snap, it's touch DNA. That is, it was delivered from a fingerprint rather than a drop of blood. Not even entirely true, sir. Not even entirely true. The touch DNA is not effing touch DNA, as in proving you have to touch it. That's been testified in court. Touch DNA can mean trace DNA. It can mean transfer DNA. Transfer DNA, in the industry, they call transfer DNA touch DNA. What's the difference? Touch implies, as Blum just did, that means your fingerprint touched the item. Touch. The word touch means I touched it. Even Howard Blum thinks that. The defense had a problem and tried to get Judge Hippler to say, we don't want the word touch being used to a jury because it's not true that it's proven that it's been touched. It could be transfer DNA. And Hippler was like, so what? In the industry, it's called touch DNA. Yes, but it makes people imply that he literally touched it. There are other explanations on how DNA gets on a piece of item that isn't meaning you touched it. It could have been transferred. And Hippler's like, so what? The industry calls it touch DNA. And even Blum runs with it. Touch DNA means his finger touched it. No, it does not. It's a common term, touch DNA, which includes transfer DNA, sloughing off of skin cells, or you get something on you and then you touch something else and then that thing rubs off. That can be a transfer DNA. It doesn't mean you physically touched the item. But Blum has fallen for the same shit everyone else in America does. Touch DNA means Brian Kohberger's finger touched it. Maybe, or maybe not. Touch DNA, the word touch DNA, does touch is a misnomer, and the defense knows it. They even had an expert come on the stand and say, yeah, you're right. It doesn't necessarily, they had a defense for the prosecution say, you're right. We don't know how the DNA of Bryan Kohberger got on the knife sheath. We can't prove definitively that he touched it. That's what they said under examination. We can't prove that he touched it. Well, then why are you using the word touch DNA? Well, that's just how we call it in the business. Okay, but a jury is going to hear the word touch DNA and say Bryan Kohberger touched it with his finger. Well, who cares? It's just semantics. No, the jury is going to be led to think that Bryan Kohberger touched it, and there's other explanations. All right, we've hit that enough. And here's the kicker of this. It's pretty shaky evidence. That's even Blum says. That's pretty shaky evidence. The courtroom reality was that in case after case, touch DNA had been tarnished by a motley collection of false positive results. Blum just gives one sentence to that, but listen carefully one more time. In the courtroom reality is that in case after case, touch DNA has been tarnished by a motley collection of false positive results. In other words, people think, like many people who attack me on my site, that touch DNA is touch DNA. That means Bryan Kohberger had to have been there and he had to touch the item. End of story. He was there. This proves it definitively. And even Howard Blum is saying, in case after case in America, we get false positives of people who are at crime scenes that weren't there because of touch DNA. It's sketchy. A smart defense attorney might argue that there was just as much likelihood of touch DNA being accurate as a judge's winning the lottery. Who wants to condemn someone to execution based on those odds? And the car videos, there was no image, and this is important because I've said this all along, and I thought, well, maybe they know something we don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, because I keep telling you what this paragraph's going to say. Howard Blum's confirming what I've been saying the entire time. Here it is. There was no image of the driver in any of the videos. There is not a single shot that displayed a license plate. None. And that meant that there was nothing definitively putting Kohberger at the wheel or demonstrating beyond a reasonable doubt that it was his car. Full stop. Even Blum, who has a hit piece, this whole book is about how Kohberger did the killings. And he's saying the same thing that I've been saying. There is no proof whatsoever that white Elantra on the videos is Kohberger's car. You don't see Kohberger in the car. You don't even see that it has no front license plate. They lied about that in the PCA, although they will say not a deliberate lie. It was an accident and it wasn't intentional to say that we observed the car with no license plate. They did not observe the car with no license plate. After they saw all the videos and couldn't tell if it had a license plate or not, and after the FBI gave them Bryan Kohberger's name, and after they found out Bryan Kohberger drove a car with no front license plate, they then went back and rewrote the PCA, the probable cause affidavit, to say, we observed a car arriving at the house with no front license plate. And when questioned by Ann Taylor on the stand, is it true you couldn't see there was a license plate? Well, that's true. We didn't see that there was a license plate. But yet you wrote in there that you observed that there was no license plate. Well, yeah, because after we found out about Bryan Kohberger, we knew he didn't have a license plate, and we were changing it to add the facts, but it wasn't intentional. It's kind of a deliberate mix-up. So you accidentally gave evidence to a magistrate that allowed them to get a search warrant based on a piece of evidence that was not true. You did not observe the white Elantra with no license plate on it, but you told a magistrate that, and you got a search warrant, an arrest warrant. Sorry. All right. After all, there were a lot of Hyundai Elantras on the roads besides Kohberger's, and adding to the muddle, it had taken the FBI 3 tries before they settled on the vehicle's year for the car. That had been a string of miscalculations, and a jury might not be very forgiving. Maybe. You're right. They had to keep changing the dates of the cars to get to Kohberger's car. And the cell tower triangulations? I'm glad Howard Blum pointed out. Now, again, he mocks all of this, even after he tells you they got problems. Prosecution has problems. He's still trying to find a way to mock it. But the cell tower triangulations peel away the well-documented limitations of the process, and Kohberger's phone could be placed anywhere within a 13-mile radius of the murder house. And that's about as definitive as a suspicion, not a certainty. So in other words, prosecution has been telling everybody and convincing everybody in America Bryan Kohberger was circling the house, pinging off the cell tower that services the house, making you believe that he was right outside the house, going around the neighborhood of the house, and it could be a 13-mile radius, and they misled and misdirected and used clever language to say Kohberger's phone pinged off of a cell tower that services the residence Or even better yet, Kohberger's phone pinged off a cell tower that services within 100 meters of the house at 112. The more you look at their wording, he's further and further potentially away from the house. But still in America, people are convinced. Brian Kohberger is seen driving around in circles around the house over and over again, and we've got him on video. Brian Kohberger was there, and now his DNA is in the house as well. So I don't know why we're having a trial. We literally see him driving around the house, and he left his DNA in the house. Done deal. But again, all of this has major problems. The eyewitness identification. Here we go. The eyewitness identification. Well, a lot of people have bushy eyebrows, like the intruder, not just the suspect. Besides, testimony from a witness who was frozen and in shock, as Dylan Mortensen had been bluntly characterized in a police affidavit, would be easy to impugn. Oh, by the way, not only did she say she was in frozen shock, but she also said that she might have dreamt the whole entire thing. She was super drunk, and it may not have even happened. But that's one of their star witnesses. And by the way, as we know by the reading of this book in this chapter right now, the prosecution has come forward with yet another eyewitness. Suddenly, because Dylan Mortensen has shit, she has no credibility, and she didn't see Kohberger in the house. She saw maybe she saw somebody with bushy eyebrows, of which when she was shown a picture of Brian Kohberger, didn't identify that's the guy I saw. So she cannot put Brian Kohberger in the house by identification. But now all of a sudden, here comes out of the woodworks the DoorDash driver that night who says, hey, I sat right next to Brian Kohberger and I saw him in there at the house. That is what I would call, but Blum would never call, and most people in America would never call, a prosecution Hail Mary. Shit, our case looks really weak. We got a really bad witness inside the house. We got a shit Dylan Mortensen. We can't put her on the stand. She's got shit of testimony. Let's find another eyewitness. Oh, let's go lean on the DoorDash driver who hasn't talked for 2.5 years and say, hey, you saw Brian Kohberger there, right? Wink, wink, nod, nod. Okay, I guess I'm going to go testify that I saw Brian Kohberger there. Where was that shit 2.5 years ago? Where was that 2.5 years ago? Now all of a sudden we got another eyewitness? Come on. But people will buy it. People will buy it. And you know what's funny is the jury won't know, right? The jury is probably not going to be told that this DoorDash driver didn't come forward until recently, that for 2.5 years there's been utter silence about her seeing Brian Kohberger outside the house. And now, as the trial's about to get here, and as the prosecution's case has a whole bunch of holes in it, suddenly they need another eyewitness, and so one comes forward. But I bet you they're going to try to make sure that the jury never hears that person wasn't on the list from day one, that they just came forward recently because their case is weak. Or weaker than they want it to be. And again, I know you're thinking, devil's advocates, you're really working hard to get Brian Kohberger off. No. Again, at the end of the day, I don't care. If Brian Kohberger is guilty, then so be it. But the evidence is weak, and you are about to kill somebody, rushing. You're rushing to, or not you. I always do this rhetorical thing. When I say you, I mean rhetorically. We are rushing to get the chemicals and a firing squad in place right away so we can kill him immediately, when we may be getting it wrong, because we have a raging Woody to try and make sure that he gets killed before anybody figures out that this is wrong. There should be appeals. How do you kill the man right now? There's going to be appeals for days on this thing. So I don't know why they're rushing to get the chemicals in stock, because even if he's convicted, it's going to be appealed, I'll guarantee you. And the murder weapon, where was that? The police had not found the long-bladed knife used in the killings, and so far they had not revealed whether they had been able to establish that Kohberger ever owned such a weapon. And the motive? The timeline narrative that the prosecution had been chasing owed as much to clairvoyance as psychology. Speculative psychobabble at best. As such, wispy conjecture would never sway a practical thinking Idaho jury. Now again, this is Blum telling you how the defense thinks. He will try to counter it and say, it's not really that bad, but he's saying, hey, the defense is thinking they got a really good case, because this is just psychobabble. There is no motive here. As far as as far as that wily Bill Thompson, well, the wags said Biden's presidency had made one truth uncomfortably clear. Experience was just another word for old. So they're like, people aren't going to buy Bill Thompson. He's an old fart. They're not going to sympathize with him. The defense or the jury is not going to feel relatable to the old fart up there with the beard and looking like Santa Claus. So the defense is now emboldened. They went on the offense, and they began hammering away at the foundations of the state's arguments. And in the process, they posed incendiary questions that had the potential to burn the case against Kohberger down to the ground. What if there's another story out there, the defense asked, another version of what had happened that night? There were large, lingering mysteries that the prosecution had refused to address, and the defense was now very pointedly working to make the case that these inconvenient truths, when lined up at end to end, hinted at another still untold story, and that another disturbing possibility existed. In other words, another alternative suspect, somebody with actual motive, not some incel who can't get laid, who is dropping out of school and decided the only thing that's left on the table for your life if you get kicked out of school is to go murder 4 people. The prosecution had most recently asserted that the killer had done his work in a brutally effective 8 minutes. So the most recently, according to Blum, and this is funny. This is odd. I don't get this. This is baffling me. What I know is I believe that they said that the car was still in motion at 4:07 a.m. and sped away from the scene at 4:20 a.m. If you take 4:20 minus 4:07, you've got 13 minutes. So I said that they're saying officially it could be done in somewhere in that 13-minute window. I've factored in some other factors and said it realistically it's more like 8 minutes. Now, according to Blum, they're saying the time is between 4:02 and 4:10. Well, 4:02, the car is still in motion as far as we know. So I don't know if Blum's wrong about something or what, because the car was still in motion at 4:02. So if the 4:10, and I don't. For the record, I don't think either of these times are correct on Blum. Although Blum is saying that how did he word it? Most recently, it was asserted the killer had done his work in 8 minutes between 4:02 and 4:10. I don't think that's the official statement today, but that's at one point apparently what Blum said was their theory. That was done in 8 minutes between 4:02 and 4:10. I think there's a problem with that. Xana was on the phone, still on TikTok at 4:12, so it couldn't have been over by 4:10. I think the car was still in motion at 4:07, so it couldn't have started by 4:02. So there's problems with that right off the bat. But do the grim mathematics, and it worked out to an efficient 2 minutes per victim, and each pair was hunkered down for the night on separate floors. Could a single assassin, a graduate student and not a Sicario, get the job done with such disciplined professionalism? Even Howard Blum has to say, that sounds a little rough. Can one person kill 4 people in 8 minutes? Then not only did he kill four people in 8 minutes, but then disappears into the night without leaving a single drop of blood in the house, in his car, on his clothes, or in the apartment. I've been saying that from day one. That's the bigger mystery. It's not even the amount of time it took to do the killings. It's how the hell do you not track DNA out of the house? How do you not leave more of your DNA in the house? How do you do all that in 8 minutes and leave so little of anything anywhere except for an accidental button knife sheath DNA stamp? And the stunned cops who arrived at the scene had described what they had encountered as a bloodbath. Was this lack of blood evidence testimony to the killer's fastidiousness or a prod to go down other ruminative paths? The coroner, this is getting interesting. The coroner had reassured Steve Gonzalez that his brave daughter had fought back like a tiger. Now, my God, the story changes all the time about who was awake and who was fighting back. Because what the people want to do, and those who say that it was done in 8 minutes want to tell you that everybody was asleep, and so it's easy to kill people who are asleep. Then they will concede slightly that maybe Xana woke up, but Ethan was asleep, and Maddie was asleep, and Kaylee may have just woke up a little bit, but she was attacked. But we've also been told recently that Kaylee fought back, Xana fought back, and Ethan fought back. So all of these things don't add up because the prosecution wants you to believe they're all basically completely hammered, drunk, or sleeping, and very little fighting back. But according to this, the coroner reassured Steve Gonzalez that his daughter fought like a tiger, which means there was a struggle. So now that makes it a little harder to do in 8 minutes. And yet, no traces of cuts, scrapes, or bruises were observed on Koberger. 4 young, fit targets, and he somehow traipsed away with his pasty skin as smooth as and unblemished as any sedentary academic. It didn't seem possible. So even Blum is indicating, and again, he's pointing what the defense is thinking. There's no way that somebody did this in 8 minutes with people fighting back and didn't get marks on him, didn't leave DNA at the scene other than that little tiny piece of touch DNA, and didn't track any of the victim's blood out of the house. It's virtually impossible what you're saying happened. So it didn't happen the way you said it did. And that's what we're coming down to at the end of this whole thing. It didn't happen the way you said it did. So the question becomes, does a jury care whether it happened the way you said it did? Is it good enough for them to believe, well, Brian Koberger did it, it just didn't happen the way they say it did? Maybe it took an hour. Maybe it took more time. Maybe he didn't arrive at 4:02. Maybe he didn't arrive at 4:07. Who cares? He did it. That's all we really care about. Is that what the jury is going to say? Or they want to know, how was it done? And if they can't figure out how it was done, there's a problem. We'll see. And what about the coroner's autopsy report? This is super interesting as well as we finish this chapter up pretty soon here. What about the coroner's autopsy report? What was behind the delay in the determination of Ethan's wounds? Listen, I didn't know this. The autopsy was performed on November 17 on Ethan, but the report of his death was not issued for nearly a month on December 15. Had there been a problem in reaching the findings? A final analysis had to have been subject to debate. It's a question mark, actually. But anyways, so why did Ethan's... We were told in the most recent Dateline hit piece that Ethan was asleep in bed and was killed in one fell swoop that cut an artery, and that was it, finished him off. And then the killer spent some time carving his legs, was an additional graphic detail that was put in. But supposedly he was dispatched instantly with a arterial cut. But according to this, it took a month to determine how Ethan was killed. How does that shit add up? Inquiring minds want to know. A further troubling fact, the coroner's description of the wounds, as noted in court documents, seem to differ from floor to floor in the house. This is important. This is going to the idea that there was more than one killer and more than one weapon. Kaylee and Maddie, lying in the same bed on the third floor, suffered visible stab wounds, according to the coroner. Yet on the floor below, Xana succumbed to wounds caused by a, quote, edged weapon, a different wording. Ethan's were, quote, caused by a sharp focus injuries, unquote. So one has to ask, was there some doubt in the coroner's mind that the wounds were all caused by the same weapon? But these suspicions were just preludes to the bigger mystery of the defense. No longer passive, was now shouting out loud. In an objection to the state's motion to protective order, the team zeroed in on several lingering questions. It was a revelatory document and provocative one. It insightfully pointed out that back in the early stages of the case, the prosecution had been made aware of 2 additional male DNA found inside the King Road residence, as well as 1 male DNA glove found outside the residence just days after the murders. That's interesting to me. I had heard about 1 male DNA inside the house and 1 male DNA outside the house in a glove. Now they're saying there's 3 different male DNAs other than Kohberger's. 2 individual male DNA inside the house. Somehow I missed that. I think it has always been out there and I just missed it. But 2 sources of DNA, male DNA that's not Kohberger's inside the house, and 1 male DNA outside the house that's not Kohberger's. So there's 3 sources, and it sounds like it's 2 different males inside the house. That's what it sounds like. But I have to go back and look at it. Again, my memory's a little fuzzy on this. I feel like I maybe have heard this before, but I always thought it was one drop of blood inside and 1 drop of blood outside that was found, and there were 2 different males. Now there's 3. If the DNA had been Kohberger's, the prosecution would have trumpeted its revelation. That's a huge point. I want everybody to know. In all cases, what I've been pointing out, if the prosecution had video of Bryan Kohberger's face as he walked into the house, that would be all over mainstream news, and they would be trumpeting that all day long, every day, all day. And I've said that over and over again. If, as people say, Bryan Kohberger drove back to the house the next morning in broad daylight, we would have video. Lots of that video that we see of the car where the headlights wash out who's in the car. In broad daylight, there will be no washing out. You will see who's in the car. If they had that video, as many people seem to think that they do, oh yeah, they've got Kohberger on camera, his face in the car the next day. Really? Because like Blum was saying, if they had that, it would have been all over the press. It would have been trumpeted as, here's proof, everybody. You know Kohberger did it. They've shown so much to prejudice against Kohberger. There's no way in hell they have video of his face, or it would have already been put out there. That's my take. But some people still maintain they've got clear shot images of Bryan Kohberger's face that just hasn't been seen, because why would they show it to you, devil's advocates? They don't give a shit have to prove things to you. They just have to prove it to a jury. Horse shit. We have been trying to convict Bryan Kohberger in the court of public opinions for 2.5 years. Everything that comes out is trying to tell you why he's guilty. If they had the effing video of his face, we would have seen it, I assure you. So those of you who are resting at night thinking, oh, devil's advocates is an idiot, wait till they see the pictures of Bryan Kohberger's face at the house. It doesn't exist. That's my opinion. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll eat shit. I'll be like, fuck, I guess I was wrong. But I'm telling you, logic tells you they don't have that video. We would have seen it. Trust me. But I could be wrong. There's always a possibility I could be wrong. The state's stony silence, the defense believed, could only mean one thing. The DNA came from 3 other men, and that left an obvious yet very pertinent question unanswered. Who were they, and how do these 3 unknown men fit into the horrific events of that night? We need to know. If there's other people and the defense has offered proffer of other suspects, why didn't law enforcement look into it? Why did they just ignore? And there was one more. The motion dramatically threw a lit match at another powder keg. Quite effectively, it demolished several tantalizing press reports. Forget the fanciful stories about the online direct messages between Kohberger and one of the victims. Forget the alleged run-in at the Main Street Moscow restaurant where Maddie and Xana had worked. The defense categorically asserted that there's no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. What he's trying to say there is the media had repeatedly told people in public on news accounts that Brian Kohberger was direct messaging one of the victims, stalking one of the victims, had run into them in one article at a restaurant where Maddie and Xana had worked. All of it was categorically untrue, and they had the prosecution testify in court. There was no evidence Brian Kohberger had any interaction with any of the victims prior to the murder. None. And they finally had to admit it under the stand. We don't know of any incident yet. Over and over again, they told the public Brian Kohberger had interacted with these girls, had texted the girls, had stalked the girls. And the prosecution had to come out and admit under oath, there's no evidence that Brian Kohberger knew any of the girls or stalked any of the girls. Oops. But you know what? Once you F somebody in the public opinion, you can't un-F them. You can't get un-F'd, right? And if there was no connection, then there was no plausible motive. And without a motive, the random brutal killing of 4 college students by a grad student from a nearby university remained an enigma. Why did he do it? There wasn't an answer because the prosecution's story just doesn't make sense. And I agree, it has a major problem. But some people don't think there's any problem with this. But there was still another mystery at the heart of this case, namely the 8-hour gap between when Dylan Mortensen had first heard the disquieting noises in the house, there's someone here, and spotted a masked, black-dressed intruder, and when the police finally were summoned. 8 hours. There had been a lot of agile, emphatic explanations offered to explain away this remarkable delay, and none so far, the defense believed, had been satisfactory or the ring of truth. Not just the defense, a lot of people in America, even people who think Kohberger's guilty, will say, I don't understand how the girls didn't call 911 for 9 hours or 8 hours. So even people who think Kohberger is guilty, they're like, I still don't understand that move because something's sketchy as fuck with that. And so the defense's strategy had now taken a new shape, a new direction. The accumulated doubts that had worked to liberate them from simply poking holes in the prosecution's case. With this freedom, they began to explore new narratives, alternative versions of might have happened, alternative suspects, and the fateful night in November on King Road. And if Kohberger wasn't the killer, or if it was just an accomplice rather than the sole perpetrator, then they realized they had to go back to what they had previously brushed over. They had to work their way to an explanation that made sense. And the trail led inexorably to drugs. Dun, dun, dun. All right, so that's it. That's the end. That's enough for now. We're going to save the last 2 chapters, which is apparently the drug connection, that the prosecution, that Blum is going to suggest that the defense is going on a drug hit theory, that this is a drug hit. That's what it sounds like he's going to say, is that's the defense's thing. I think there's a better motive than the drug motive, but we did hear the drug motive. There's teeth to it. We're going to look into it next. Thanks for watching.